So I've got a stack of videos. This one just so happened to be at the top. I'm going to get caught up on these hypothetically. And I also have the class that I'm super excited about, and thanks for being patient. And the numbers. This channel, I don't think I've ever even talked about subscribing. I've never mentioned it, but it is increasing at a very interesting rate. And that's good feedback. It tells me that you're digging this kind of thing, and it's valuable. And I thought today's video was particularly important because to say that so many suffer from anxiety and depression, it's just a given, particularly in the Western world. Now, again, I talk about the Ph.D, I talk about other cultures that live in a different state, a different vibrational intensity. But there's something about modern humans, and I'm going to put forth a hypothesis in this video that it's the assumption of materialism that is the cause of so much depression and anxiety. So let me kind of unpack that for you through this video. So we know cognitive therapy is powerful. It's really the most popular therapy these days. You call up a therapist, you say you're depressed or anxious, very good chance they're going to do some form of cognitive therapy. And what cognitive therapy does is it gets at your assumptions, your beliefs about the world. Faulty beliefs, unrealistic beliefs lead to unhappiness and anxiety. So if you have this assumption that people always let you down, that's a rough one, and it's going to cause feelings of despair and depression. But if you examine it, and so you kind of turn on this Byron Katie, are you sure about that? Are you absolutely certain about this? And when you reflect on these assumptions, you realize I don't really have as much evidence as I thought. And in fact, it was just 2 people who let me down last week. But if I look more empirically, experientially, it turns out, well, it's a false assumption. False assumptions lead to depression and anxiety. But I don't think cognitive therapy has gone deep enough. Cognitive therapy typically deals with your social relationships, your assumptions about work and society. But they haven't gone deep enough down to the very fabric of what we call the material world. What if those beliefs are causing depression and anxiety? Because let's consider the materialistic assumption. The materialistic assumption is a really difficult one. It's surprising. When I stumbled on this, I'm surprised no one else has stumbled on it earlier, because the materialistic assumption is that there was nothing, and then there was something, matter, and the laws of physics, and that these just mostly by chance coalesced into planets and suns and stars, and then life formed, and then suddenly brains evolved, and then very complex brains evolved, and poof, then there was consciousness, and we could start to reflect on the whole thing. And of course, when your meat suit is done, so are you. And that's a tough one. And it's not just a tough way to live. And there are some people, I think like Bill Maher kind of gets away with it, and a few other types that are like, it's all random. It's all, we're just materialistic, like a puff of smoke comes and goes, and, ashes to ashes kind of thing. And they seem to make it work. But I think for most people, those fundamental assumptions are really difficult to deal with. So let's go to the other possibility. So what if it's consciousness that's fundamental? And consciousness is giving rise, almost in a dreamlike, a little twist. I mean, dreams are very random. So this material, what we call the material world, a creation of consciousness, it has a little bit of consistency to it. So it's a little bit different here and there. And it has this image of me being separate, but there's all kinds of reasons why we might speculate, particularly when we turn on the Byron Katie kind of spotlight and say, do you know this for absolute certain? And when we start questioning, wow, am I really separate? What about all these interesting experiences that happen, like ESP and mystical experiences, and even the feeling of being stared at, or intuition? And these all strongly suggest an interconnected consciousness, a single consciousness. And more importantly, again, if you wanted to get this to take home, shortest version of the Nisargadatta, you are not your body. And so with materialism, you are your body. You are your meat suit. With the consciousness as fundamental, then the meat suit is just part of the dream. And all of this, when this is gone, you're still around. Now, not you, maybe your ego or your personality, but fundamentally consciousness. The act of perceiving comes first. And there's some very interesting things, particularly when we pit these two against each other, because you may not want to, well, are we just going for what feels good? Because the consciousness is fundamental, feels good, because we're all eternal spiritual beings having a human trip. And you say, well, that does feel good. That's the point of the video. But you say, well, I want to be true to reality. I don't want to just go with what feels good. And so, we could break this down a little bit and say, well, if we're putting these two against each other, which one needs the other? And you could say, well, the materialistic hypothesis, you just have to assume that all this stuff happened before we were conscious beings and could reflect on it. That's a heck of a belief. That's quite a leap of faith. On the other hand, my conscious direct experiences, it doesn't necessarily need the material world at all. It doesn't need faith or belief. Maybe in the particular content of what's happening around. I mean, is this a dream? And, am I really sitting here in my office? Well, who knows, as Descartes philosophized, who knows about the specifics? But the very fact of the experience is enough it's self-evident to prove that it's not an illusion. In other words, you couldn't think you were conscious if you were not conscious in the first place. So that's a very important trick with all this, because again, the point I'm trying to make is that the materialistic hypothesis is something you have to believe in and have faith in. With the conscious hypothesis, it's self-evident. In fact, one could argue that the only thing in the universe that you really know is your conscious experience. Everything else could be an illusion. So that puts a lot into this consciousness first hypothesis. And so when people meditate and get into a really intense state of awareness with no content, with no particular thing, no sound, no particular sound or no particular visual stimuli, and awareness becomes awareness only of awareness, then we've got a really interesting experience where consciousness is independent of what we call the material world. But the material world always needs our consciousness. There's never been a time in life when you've experienced the material world without being conscious of it. And so what I'm trying to point out is that there's two ways you can vibrate, two ways you can live. And modern humans, particularly in the West, we have a certain vibration to our existence, and it's all tied in with the materialistic myth. It's tied in with this idea that all this matter that we assume is out there, that's it. And that's why, they dismiss consciousness in the first place, because they don't need it. It's either an illusion or it's an epiphenomenon or it's just something that will be explained away at some point. But again, that whole vibration of materialism is very depressing for most of us because, when your meat suit is gone, you're gone. And there's no way around you do identify with the body, with the materialistic hypothesis. You can't help it. That's all you are, is the meat suit. On the other hand, you're a bunch of cells, 3 pounds of gelatinous goo in your skull. There's nothing else there. And the consciousness hypothesis is just so vastly different in terms of the way it vibes and the way it feels to have to be here and now. And it's just a lot different, and it seems devoid. It seems almost impossible to carry the anxiety and depression into an existence where you put consciousness as fundamental.